So good morning, everyone. I am Emily Dow. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Academic Affairs at the Maryland Higher Education Commission. This is the Program Review Process Advisory Council meeting on February 10th at 10:02 a.m. Before we dive into anything of substance, I do want to run through who is present. So I'm going to run through our membership list. So if you are here, please just come off mute and let us know. I know Chancellor Perman was unable to make it, but I believe Dr. Rinn is here. Is that right?
Correct.
Great. Good morning. Dr. Phillips from MAC.
Good morning.
Good morning. Is Mr. Power here from MICUM? President Wilson from Morgan. I know he's here. Oh, you're off. You're on mute, sir. That's okay. We know you're here. Dr. Gantz from St. Mary's. Do not see her on the screen. We will go to President Anderson from UMES. We do not see her on the screen. President Ginsburg from Towson.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I'm here.
Great. Thank you. Provost Ward.
Good morning.
Great. Thank you. Provost Van Dolman. And did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. President Willis from Howard. Do not see President Willis. President Williams.
Good morning.
Good morning. Provost Stryer.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Provost Milner.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. President Yam. No, President Yam. President Jaskin.
Good morning.
Good morning. Provost, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly. Gange?
Ganji.
Ganji.
Yep.
I apologize.
Like the river without the S.
Thank you. And Provost Meyer Lee.
Fine.
Good morning. Is there anyone from the campuses on this call that I did not call on?
This is President Anderson from UMES. I'm on the phone.
Great. Thank you, President Anderson. Glad that you're able to join us.
Yes,
I
we
do
don't
want
have visuals.
Yeah. Wonderful. I do want to recognize we have a couple of MHEC staff. We have Kimberly Ward, our AAG, is here. We have Elena Quiroz-Lavanas, who is our new Deputy Secretary, and we have Alex Wynn, who is staff support to this work group. And then, of course, let me just turn some time over to Secretary Rye for opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. So glad to see all of you, our higher education leaders here. I know this is a very, very busy time for everyone. I'll be rushing to Annapolis in maybe in half an hour or so, but I'm listening to everything from my car. I'm so glad to see that this process is moving forward. First, we all came in a work group. We worked with the legislature, and we came up with our recommendation that resulted in a bill, House Bill 1244. And there are various aspects of this bill, and for each requirement, each recommendation, there's a deadline. I'm very happy to say this, that with Dr. Dow's leadership and all of your contributions and support and guidance, we have so far met all the deadlines. I think that's important. Today's conversation is also extremely important, because this is about workforce analysis and how workforce analysis, what role it plays in the academic program approval process is important, so that there's more clarity, less confusion, how we move forward. I will also say that not just in the context of academic program approval process, this aspect of creating homegrown talent for the jobs that exist in Maryland and the jobs that will come in the next 5 to 10 years, we as higher education community are going to play a very important role. So let's look at these data, these numbers in a broader context. We have a lot of existing programs how can we increase capacity in those programs, how can we further align those existing programs with the jobs and requirements of business and industries. It is a great opportunity for us. Last thing I'll say that now 50% of program modification changes can happen without any process or without coming to Maryland. Without coming to MHAT, I'll strongly encourage all of you to look at that and take advantage of that as well. With that, I'll give the meeting back to Dr. Dow. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you, Secretary Rai. Let's proceed into our agenda. A meeting agenda was circulated on Friday. If I can get a motion to approve our meeting agenda, unless somebody would like to add an agenda item.
So moved.
Thank you, President Anderson. Second.
Second is Mary Lou Yan.
President Yam, you're joining by phone. Wonderful. Thank you. Glad to have you on the call. All in favor?
Aye.
I see a majority of hands raised. Okay. I'd like to spend a little bit of time walking through, just as Secretary Rai noted, our draft workforce needs analysis. This comes as a requirement of House Bill 1244 from last legislative session that the General Assembly would like the agency to produce in collaboration with Department of Labor and Department of Commerce an analysis of workforce needs and related programs, as well as an analysis of emerging needs. Our commission received a draft of this analysis at our December commission meeting, and they requested that we come specifically to this advisory council for input, thoughts, and feedback on what this analysis looks like. Two important things to share with you all as we walk through this analysis. This analysis is expected to be updated every year. So this is the first annual analysis, and it's still in draft mode, out for circulation and public comment. So I want to reassure everyone that we recognize that there are limitations to this version, but it will only get better from here. We will spend the next 12 months making improvements, first and foremost, talking with licensing boards, national organizations that represent specific occupations, sourcing data from other reliable and valid resources, and making improvements to this list for the next year. It is our expectation that it would be released early in the calendar year, so end of December or early January, and we would go on a cycle, on a regular cycle for updates. So that's all to say. This is our first version. We know that there are some limitations, but these lists will only get better as we continue this work in understanding the workforce need for Maryland, as well as regional workforce need. So in the agenda, I shared the link to our page that has this information posted. I'm going to throw it into the chat right now so that you all can follow along. We have produced 4 different appendices. The first 2 appendices focus on in-demand occupations and related programs. The last 2 appendices focus on emerging workforce needs and a very specific definition that we have developed, again, in collaboration with Department of Labor and Department of Commerce, as well as a very specific definition around emerging programs. So let me start with the first 2 appendices, Appendix A and Appendix B. I won't go too much into the details because really we want to hear from you and your thoughts. So if I can get through a description of these 4 appendices, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So Appendix A identifies in-demand occupations using 2 fairly basic metrics. We use Maryland Department of Labor occupational projection data, and we identified occupations that have more than 1,000 job openings over the next 10 years, predicted to have more than 1,000 job openings over the next 10 years. And we also looked at job postings through Maryland Department of Labor's job posting service and identified occupations that had more than 1,000 job opening or job postings in 2023. So two sources of information, a projection as well as retrospective information around job postings through Department of Labor. Combining those two metrics, we have identified what we call now Appendix A, a number of occupations that are in demand. Some of these occupations are very obvious. You can see tons of teachers on here. You can see elements around cyber, computer analytics, data analysis as well. But then, of course, we have a number of health professions, nursing, dental assistants. You see we have a dental assistant here. So lots of in-demand occupations on this list. Another important piece to this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I recognize that that is sometimes hard to read. Bureau of Labor Statistics identifies what's considered typical education to enter into that occupation. That could also be interpreted as minimum education needed to enter into that occupation. So, for example, registered nurses, the typical education or minimum education is a bachelor's degree. However, we recognize that associate's degrees could also lead into a registered nurse occupation. So take this typical education from BLS with a little bit of grain of salt. It is a national standard for these occupational codes. So that's Appendix A. So it's one thing to know about in-demand occupations and say, wow, we're going to need 32,000 software developers over the next 10 years. What kind of software developer programs do we have? So in Appendix B, we aligned the different occupations with specific SIP codes. The federal government has what we call a SIP to SOC crosswalk. So those occupational codes crosswalked into those classification program codes. So what you have in Appendix B is in this first column, let me make this a little bit bigger for you all. In this first column, we know from Appendix A, architects, we need quite a few architects. There's going to be 217 annual openings each year over the next 10 years. So what kind of programs do we have out there for architecture? So we know that there's kind of 4 SIP codes that lead into that occupational code. And we have 2 programs that use this SIP code, 1 program that uses the 3rd SIP code, and then the number of degrees awarded for each of those SIP codes for the past 5 years, from 2019 to 2023. So this gives you a little bit of context of, wow, we're really only producing about 30 to 50 architects at the bachelor's level, when really we need, according to Department of Labor data, 217 architects each year over the next 10 years. So this is to give a little bit of context of the academic programs that currently exist, as well as the academic programs that may not exist. So, for example, we do not have any bachelor's level programs using this SIP code that leads to potentially an architectural occupation. And so it just contextualizes academic programs with workforce need. This is a pretty hefty document. It goes through each of those occupations, and again, identifies existing programs at that BLS education level for a particular occupation. President Ginsburg, I see your hand raised. I'm going to stop presenting so we can see everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. This is very useful, and I appreciate the data. One of the questions that I think is very important for the state to address, and certainly I think what you've addressed are, what are the needs today for jobs that exist? As an educator and as the president of a university that wants to prepare people not just only for today, but for tomorrow, I'm particularly interested in what are the jobs of the next 10 years, not the jobs of the last 10 years. And what we need to do as a state to prepare at our universities and colleges, at our community colleges, at our P12 schools, to prepare students not just for what is, but what will be. And my concern, my criticism of MHEC, to be quite honest, has been that we haven't been thinking futuristically. We've been thinking retroactively. How can we think more proactively and futuristically as opposed to only talking about what is there today?
Absolutely a fair point. We try to address that a little bit in Appendix C with emerging needs. I do see another hand. So before I jump into Appendix C, I think that's the point. Let me add one more thing. I think that's the point of this group is help us do that work. We certainly have open dialogue with Department of Commerce as they think about industry partners coming to the state and the emerging workforce needs for 10 new scientists to do a thing in a specific laboratory that an occupational code will not be able to capture. That's going to be really on a case-by-case basis. We're ready to do that work, but that is one path forward, is a strong collaboration with Department of Commerce for specific industries that are being targeted to come to Maryland.
Yeah.
But we are open to suggestions, ideas, and that is why we are coming to you all for thoughts on how we can do this work better.
Well, let me just add, some of the futurists are saying that the 10 most prevalent jobs for 2030 haven't yet even been invented. I think it's incumbent upon us to think with a great deal of creativity and inventiveness ourselves so that we can prepare people for jobs that we think may exist, that we know will exist, or even that we're not even sure will exist, but in fields of study that are emergent and fields of study that are important to the economy of our state and to the workforce needs that we have to prepare people for.
Thank you. Provost Milner.
Hi, Dr. Dow. I want to agree with President Ginsburg, but take it a step further. In our conversations, and I'm sure you and Dr. Rye are working on this, are we partnering with K through 12, right? Because when we think about the future and 10 years from now, we should probably be talking to kindergarten teachers, first grade teachers, third grade teachers, and helping prepare them, or at least to build the curiosity for careers in architecture, neurology, things of that nature. We know that that doesn't happen at the college level. We need to do some things, 10, 11 years before they get to 14, 15, 16 in order for them to be ready for the programs that we create, which would then lead to workforce development and wonderful careers and socially mobile people and things of that nature. So I was wondering if you guys would speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely. So we have a pretty strong relationship with MSDE. They are aware of this list. But as I said earlier, this is kind of our first run at this. It is our expectation over the next 12 months to share this list with MSDE as they think about their CTE programming, their dual enrollment opportunities, and working again with the colleges to do that alignment. That's going to take a bit of time to realize that there's this new, but it's arguably not new. It's just kind of reorganized information. But that can help us be far more strategic, to your point, and not only what we do in high school, but even taking that into the middle school and career opportunity engagement. I think many of you are familiar with Blueprints initiatives around career counselors, which is why it's been so important to have Department of Labor coming along with us on this activity, because a lot of those career counselors are funneling through Department of Labor. So there's lots of paths so that we can really address larger career needs over the next 10 years in a strategic way with MSDE, Department of Labor, and as we just discussed, Department of Commerce, when we talk about emerging fields, and we don't even know what the job is going to look like. 15, 20 years ago, we were barely talking about drone technology. And I think we now have 4 or 5 schools that now have engineering programs specific to unmanned, unpersoned aircraft vehicles. Anyway, that's all to say. Yes, MSDE, key partner, That's a to do over the next 12 months and beyond. Secretary Rye.
No, I think let's hear from Dr. Wilson and also Dr. Williams, and then I'll come back.
Great. I do not know whose hand was raised first, President Williams or President Wilson.
Wilson was raised first.
Oh, okay. Okay. Actually, I just have a brief comment. I really want to just listen for a spell, but it has to do with the possibility of the proliferation of programs across multiple institutions to try and address, quote unquote, a workforce need that might actually not be long-term. And I would hope that we would pay some attention to the fact that even though there might be a need for whatever, 500 more X's, there may already be 2 such programs at existing institutions. And so would it be in the best long-term interest of Maryland, given how much it costs to start up some of these programs, to try and grow their capacity at existing programs, as opposed to having 10 schools of architecture and saturate the market, drive down the wages, and basically within 10 years, you have an oversupply of architects who cannot get jobs?
President Wilson, I think the short answer is yes. This isn't, this analysis should be used in a variety of ways. One way, absolutely, create new programs. We do not believe at MHEC that is necessarily the most efficient way to address a workforce need. So we will be using these data, these appendices, to talk with campuses that have existing programs to say, hey, tell us about your growth potential. Tell us more about what you're doing to expand. Maybe you're already at a cap. Maybe you're struggling to find faculty. Maybe students enroll, but they don't complete because it's a really hard program, and rightfully so. We would want to be able to talk with the existing programs to better understand the potential for growth, what we can do as a state to help identify budgetary constraints around growing programs. In that context, talking about transfer pathways at the undergraduate level and expanding transfer pathways for our community college students. So President Wilson, to your point, it's not just about creating new programs. There are certainly going to be some instances where we just need new programs, and that's a good thing. But there are certainly going to be opportunities where it's not about new programs and it's about expanding our existing programs. So as an agency, and I think Secretary Rye would agree with this, that again is a next 12 months, not only expanding this analysis. So I will share with everybody, we are hiring for a director of workforce analysis, workforce need. They would be 100% devoted to this work. So they would be doing those deep dives and talking with your deans and directors, program chairs for these kinds of programs to better understand where we need to go as a state and what we can do as an agency to support existing programs. Great, thank you. President Williams.
Thank you. Just a quick comment, and maybe it's in the next 12 months. I wondered if MHEC is also focused on adding the layer of wages to the formula. There's something to be said about openings, but I think a lot of the national attention has turned to openings as well as wages. And when we talk about the wages again, that type of economic as well as social mobility, that would be the first point. And then the other one for tying in with Dr. Ginsburg's comments about emerging fields. And I see that we have both appendices C and D that are addressing that. I wonder if we might also distinguish those criteria and begin to look at how those roll into innovation funnels, because they typically will not present themselves in the way of the data as we know it. So we have to look to other sources to be able to identify emerging fields and the innovation that's there. And that might also drive us to a different set of partners that we need to look for besides just the Department of Commerce. It may be in our research areas, it may be in our business and industry areas where they're incubating work that sometimes they're not even really telling us about publicly, but they may be able or willing to disclose to a larger state agency so that we can be responsive and get ahead of those programs as well.
Thank you, President Williams. That's helpful feedback. We've talked about wages, and certainly with your comment, we can level that up. Again, we are coming to you all with your expertise to say, I'd like to see this in the next iteration, or I think this is a weakness. So President Williams, I'm going to say that is an official request that in the next iteration, we either explore wages, address wages in the next analysis, and come back to you all with what came of that work. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yes.
Yep. And noted on emerging needs and forthcoming industries that just may not even exist and are kind of sheltered for potentially good reasons, and trying to do that work differently. It's not just Department of Commerce.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, in places where I've seen this done, it wasn't the occupation that you could get to, it was the sector and the skills, right, that you could get to when you're talking about the emerging field. So that broad exposure to the sector becomes critically important.
Thank you. President Jaskin.
Sorry. Thank you, Emily. Appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on the draft so far. I would just encourage MHEC to consider sort of region as they're looking at these issues. I think we're all aware that Maryland is a net exporter, and particularly those of us who you know, we're at McDaniel very close to the Pennsylvania line, and we want to be able to be bringing in graduates, undergraduates. And so just wanted to put that on your radar. I'm not sure how that factors in right now, but it definitely feels like it should. And also from an access perspective, you know, if you've got somebody who lives 60 miles, 80 miles from an existing program, especially for, you know, people who have, you know, single family homes, that's just not possible for all of them. So just something to think about.
Thank you. Yeah, we are, per the legislature, required to do a regional analysis. And again, that will be in the next iteration. We decided we just start with statewide. So there is an expectation to consider region. The challenge there, or the question at hand, is do we talk about region within the state? Do we talk about region as Maryland in the broader context of Pennsylvania, Delaware, Virginia, West Virginia, and the like? You know, both have value, not something to solve today, but it is the forward thinking, okay, when we talk about region, what are we talking about? So thank you for that feedback. President Yam.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks for your work on this too, and the opportunity here for this discussion. I agree with my colleagues, in particular, Dr. Wilson and Dr. Williams, who talked about looking at the current capacity and how existing programs, if they already are here, how they can build and push out, because they are programs that have strong records of producing graduates that then work here in the state. And perhaps if it's a healthcare professional, where their licensing and their pass rates are, and there's a lot of ways to assess that. And I think that'll be helpful. The 1.2 that I would recommend is that in some areas, such as that registered nurses up there demand high, but in some cases, and RNs are one of them, there is the need there is because of the hospital nurse vacancy rates. I mean, we know that. I'm in that field. I've been in the field for a really long time at this point. And there's always hospital vacancies. There's big turnover. It's very hard work. You get burned out. And folks leave, they go into advanced practice, they go into teaching, or they go into another profession. And I think that's important to drill down because that is related to, in part, the education at the baccalaureate level for the RN and at the community college level.
That's exactly where we want to go next, is to talk with industry partners to better understand. It's one thing to say we need more nurses. It's another thing to say, do we need more ER nurses? Do we need more pediatric nurses? And doing that deeper dive. Quite frankly, I think what we'll end up doing is starting with a lot of the licensing boards is just that central touch point, but then talking with the employers through the licensing board and through other industry partners to be able to really hone in on what do we really mean when we say we need more nurses, and therefore talking about vacancy rates within specific specialties and fields. Thank you. Provost Ganji.
Thanks, Emily. I just wanted to follow up on what President Jaskin mentioned. You know, the degree to which workforce is porous, right, across state lines, which the higher and more technical the position, you know, I think the more porous that is. You know, I know your PhD is from New York. Secretary Rise is from Arkansas. Mine's from Wisconsin, and I work for a president from Canada and a provost from Sri Lanka, right? You know, so you know, this analysis, you know, I think I find very compelling for certain parts of the workforce, but I think the highest, you know, particularly doctoral level, you know, is a workforce that is truly much more mobile. And I'm not sure whether it makes sense to build programs and requirements that apply across the board.
Noted. Yeah, I do think so. While we've used this standard methodology, we're going to have to deviate from it in certain instances. And so we're open to those recommendations, being thoughtful about that and being data driven. You know, it can't just be ad hoc, but we need to have some flexibility there for sure. Secretary Rye, I think is next.
I think that let's hear from Dr. Ren, and then, you know, I have to hit the road. So after that, I'll speak briefly, and then you know, let's hear from Dr. Ren.
Great, Dr. Ren.
Thank you, Secretary Rye. You know, I really appreciate the comments on looking forward that have been made, because that's the point here. It takes time to develop new degree programs. So if we don't want to always be reacting to a change, then we need to be thinking in a forward manner. So I think this work needs to figure out the very, you know, important comments that have been made about what's coming next. And I know we're going to talk about emerging workforce needs and how we're going to do that research, but I think the standard workforce list might not do it for us anymore. So I think we need to think more broadly about that. Secondly, I really appreciate President Jaskin's comments on regionality. This is a small state, folks. Again, I spent most of my career in California. We can just talk about California. Who cares about anyone else? Here, we need to really care about West Virginia, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey. They're thinking about us. They're coming here for our students, our high quality, very well educated students, and they're happy to bring them to their states. So if we limit ourselves with a vision of Maryland only, and I, as public higher education in Maryland, I get that. We have to support ourselves, but we have got to think differently about that. Certainly, Dr. Ganji's comment about doctoral level work is absolutely key. People don't go for a doctoral program based on the neighborhood next door. They go for people they want to work with, programs they want to work with. And so, again, all of us make choices when we get our doctorate like that. And I just want to end by saying there really needs to be a clearer connection we believe, to the administration's goals related to economic development in the state with these workforce lists. And again, this is tricky because the political winds shift, and I'm not even going to start on our federal winds and our federal lists and all of that right now. But if the governor's asking for certain things, we need to make sure we figure out how to align with that, or to say, we don't see the workforce needs. Let's have a conversation about that, why you think there's a workforce needs. And I'm going to believe that the governor has good reason for that, and has probably some folks on his team are looking at some of those sources that are a little more forward thinking that maybe we have traditionally thought of. So again, I really want us to think differently about regionality, about looking forward, and about these graduate level, especially doctoral programs, as we think about these lists. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Secretary Rye, President Wilson, how do you want to do this?
Let's hear from President Wilson first. Then.
Well, Mr. Secretary, you've been waiting for a long time, so I can certainly wait until you speak. But I'm just sort of trying to figure out where might all of this land eventually, right? I know we are in this conversation to prevent academic program duplication, but it begs the question, several questions. Number one, given the challenges of the state finances, and the higher ed has taken a big cut there, if you will. I mean, our appropriations were cut just like the USM's by 5%. Is one place where this might land would be, perhaps the state should be looking at what it is funding now that it should not fund. Because those things some of those things on campuses may not align with these economic priorities. And so I'm sort of, if you will, saying, may there be pressure on campuses to discontinue certain programs because those programs are not in alignment with the data that has been shared, right? So I'm kind of looking to the future as well, in the same way as my colleagues, about future programs and all of that. We at Morgan, we do a lot of that. And you heard me say that I serve on the Illumina board, and we look at these data nationally. So I'm there in that camp. But there's also a different kind of future, and quite frankly, it's difficult to figure out in terms of, revenue not coming into the state. Higher ed, of course, taking a big hit out of that public higher ed. And so I'm putting that in front of us, Emily and Secretary Rye. I'm not asking for that. I'm saying, is this something we just need to be conscious of as we go through this process?
I think so. Secretary Rye, I'll let you.
No, thank you. Thank you. All wonderful suggestions. I think that it's not just, what is our current economic needs, because these economic needs will change again, in next few years, because, economy is moving forward, businesses, industries are moving at a much faster pace. But I think the program prioritization idea has been around in higher education for the last, 15 years or so. And I implemented one very aggressive one in my previous role. So, in higher education, my previous boss used to tell me that we are very good in addition, right? But other arithmetic operations, we often don't look into it, right? So that is something, financial sustainability is important. So, we have to think from that point of view. But a lot of every comment that I have heard here is so helpful, and we need to think about that in that direction. This list that we have for House Bill 1244 is just a starting place. This is not the end. And this will never be perfect, right? Because there's no way to make it perfect, right? So you're not in a stagnant environment. So it will never be perfect, but it will always be a good guiding and starting place for us. Great comments from Dr. Ginsberg about emerging areas of economy. We have to think about it. We can't put a list on that. So if you put a list on that, I'll strongly disagree because we don't know, right? But we have some ideas, and case by case, Dr. Ganges' idea. Case by case, we will have to look at that differently. Each proposal will have to make a strong case for emerging areas based on some data, some research, and other information that's out there. And based on that, we are creating these programs. So emerging areas are important, but our present needs are also important. And what we know about the needs for teaching, nursing, and cyber and others, they're also important. We have to make sure we address those needs as well. Now, if you look at emerging areas, and within emerging areas, Maryland has decided that these are 3 or 4 areas that are important to us, whether it's quantum technologies or whether it's life sciences, aerospace, IT, cyber. So creating IP is important in those areas, not just the workforce. So our institutions are quite involved in that. So that is very, very important. In terms of, in any emerging areas, you will have some people who are almost there. They need some short-term training to get into that. In 2014, we had a lot of underemployed and unemployed folks in IT area because jobs, outsourcing and all that had created that space. At the same time, we had a lot of openings in cybersecurity. So Maryland community colleges got together. They brought a labor grant for $15-16 million, and they created six-month program, cyber pathways across Maryland. They were designed for underemployed IT and unemployed IT folks. So in emerging areas, those opportunities will also be there. So everyone has a role to play, from short-term training to IP creation, and then certainly PhDs, masters, and other things. We will have those opportunities. So this list will never be perfect, but this is a good starting place. All these suggestions are wonderful. Adding wages is extremely important because social and economic mobility is a reason. And what we haven't talked much about is that we will have all these great jobs in our emerging economy. We are leading in economic area. Those opportunities will be there. What we also need to think about, how do we provide access to everyone in Maryland to those jobs? We have thousands of students who are not accessing post-secondary education. Just in Montgomery County, I saw data 2 years ago, 5,000 recent high school graduates did not access any post-secondary education. So we need to think about how do we give pathways to these jobs to every resident. That's important. And I believe Dr. Milner's suggestion about K through 12 involvement is extremely important. That's why we have been talking about what do we teach in middle school as science. If quantum technologies is our future, what is involved in quantum technology, right? It's mathematics, physics, computer science. So middle school science is often, biology or environmental science. We have to teach physics in our middle schools. That's important. So those conversations are happening. The other thing I'll say that I read that SUNY system, every graduate of SUNY system will have some basic skills in data science. Think about that. I'm thinking about places like Arkansas. Dr. Ganges, thank you for bringing that great memories from that wonderful state. I fell in love with this country from Arkansas and the governor there at that time, early 90s, right? So they're thinking about embedding AI throughout their curriculum. So if we think about emerging areas, it's not that everything is unknown. We know something. Emerging areas will be based on computing, quantum, data science, AI. One thing is to create PhD programs in everything, right? We will lose as a state if community college students are not learning these things. If every graduate, a linguistic graduate knowing some data science, Amazon will pick that person right away. Anthropology majors knowing data science, AI, psychology majors, Dr. Dow's area, right? So how do we embed these emerging area skills in all academic program, our general education? So we shouldn't be having this isolated conversation about a certain list just for new academic programs. That's very narrow, right? And I'm so glad that we have this leadership in the state of Maryland. All of you have a very good grasp, and everything that I have heard is just wonderful. And your guidance is important to us because we know little, and we are constrained by a lot of these other things, right? So let's keep thinking, and again, you have our commitment and assurance that your guidance will be reflected, and institutional sustainability, funding, and all that. These things, will change. Economies comes, goes. Sometimes I have seen in Maryland challenges 2007-8, and then I have seen much better situation. But as higher education, what role we can play to pull our economy forward? We are growing at the rate of 3%. Our unemployment is one of the lowest. So labor participation is great. We have opportunity to change the dynamics in that area. So in order to not to have this structural deficit, our economy is growing at 3%, we need to grow it at 8%. If higher education can be part of solving this problem, imagine we will get more attention even in this difficult times. So this is a time for all of us to collaborate, come together, and help the state move forward. And I believe all of us have resources, talent, and expertise to do that. And I ask for your help and support in moving the state forward, and through higher education being central to that solution. With that said, I'm going to support community college funds at the Senate in next few hours. I have a difficult road right ahead, but I'll be listening to you. I won't be speaking. Thank you to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Rai. We'll have you join us via phone shortly. Provost Van Dolman.
So I'm just going to ask a basic question first, and then follow up on one of the comments from the secretary. What is the purpose of this committee, and what is sort of in scope and out of scope? And in particular, I'm asking because I know, we need to be in compliance with the House bill. We need to do implementation. We're talking about program duplication, prioritization, but at the same time, as we're talking about workforce needs in 10 years. Like the secretary, I don't think this is a question about what programs we have, but what skills we make sure that students actually obtain in their programs. And to the point that he made about the SUNY system, where they are asking all students to gain certain skills, how do we ensure that the students that graduate from our programs have the skills to meet the workforce demands in 10 years or 20 years from now?
Lots of questions there. Let me see if I can get through them quickly. So the purpose of this advisory council is to advise the commission on matters related to program review. Because when campuses put forward a proposal for new programs, changes to existing programs, there is an element of demonstrating workforce need. And so the value of this document is to kind of give a top-down approach of what is workforce need so that you all can use it as a tool coming from MHEC, labor, and commerce collectively as you think about program development. And so that's why this workforce needs analysis is coming to you in the context of program development. That's not to say that this council isn't addressing larger issues that are not just about program development. So I would put a name to the gen ed requirement, and certainly thinking through what Maryland's gen ed requirements are for public institutions. And seems like we're in a prime time. I hear some nodding around this, some prime time for us to maybe revisit the gen ed requirements at Maryland and bring it into the 21st century. And that's not an isolated program. That's about making sure our students, regardless of program, come out well-rounded.
Thank you.
Thank you. So again, this council is to advise us. So I will say explicitly what I am hearing is that there may be interest to rethink some of our gen ed requirements. That's a much longer element here, but that may be. So I see some hands raised.
The general education is not in this purview or this charge, and I warn you that is a third rail. As someone who has done a lot of this work, I think we should be very cautious. Do I think we need different kinds of ideas for our students? Absolutely. But I do not want this. This is not part of this program duplication charge. Don't derail this whole process by talking about general education. I warn you about that. Thank you. I'm not interested in talking about general education based on this. Thanks.
Let me go back to questions hand. Dr. Phillips.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. It's more of a technical question that I have. It's regarding Appendix A. As I look through the list, I noticed that the new job postings, there are some missing aspects of the spreadsheet that don't have numbers. And it sort of drove me around to sort of look at the methodology. We only have 18 associate's degrees that are considered in demand based on this, which really ties into a comment I think that Dr. Williams made about salaries and wages, because just questioning the sort of logic here, are we defining in demand programs by vacancies? Because couldn't we actually be fulfilling vacancies in high demand programs that don't have high turnover? And maybe one of the reasons why you have such significant turnover is because of the wages associated with certain degree pathways. I haven't looked at the spreadsheet close enough to know, but I do think that that's an important aspect to get the full picture of what we're dealing with.
Absolutely. I think that's why we need to incorporate wages in this analysis to think through, what the impact of wages on a vacancy rate. And that's a bit more of a complicated analysis, but it's definitely on the docket to include in a future iteration. I appreciate that. Thank you. President Anderson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dow. First of all, I want to say I would agree with my colleagues on many of the points that they have made, especially looking at where we're going for the future. But after the secretary spoke, I also stepped back and said, are we really looking at the right analysis? Is it really about programs? Is it really about degrees that we're doing today? Or is it more about what we know employers are looking for? And that is, what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that the students really need to have, that our graduates need to have? I'm sure many of us on this call did not go to school or wherever we went to become a university president, whether it's community college or four-year. But our knowledge and skills of problem solving, of communicating, of really decision making, that came from probably a mixture of different types of experiences that we had. So it makes me want to step back and say, although I agree with Dr. Wren, I don't want to be part of a gen ed discussion. It really does come down to what are the talents that the workforce is looking for, the knowledge, the skills, the abilities, those particular unique things that I don't think that this really gets at. So that's my contribution to say that I think there is a missing area here that we probably need to consider and take it into consideration and align it with the other comments that we've been making.
Great. Thank you, President Anderson. Knowing that we are close to time, we will stop here. We do have a survey, very simple survey, open-ended survey to provide some feedback on the methodology and what is included in the appendices. It is up on our website. We've extended it to the end of this week, so please do. We've gotten some pretty good feedback from that survey. Just gives you an opportunity to put it in writing. Please do share this analysis with folks on your teams, at your campuses. We really do want to get feedback as we think through this. It's our expectation that we will present this analysis for adoption as an initial analysis at our February commission meeting. So if there are some major concerns about this analysis, please do tell us now so that we can account for that, we can address it. We will certainly share that with our commissioners. But this is, again, an ongoing exercise, and we are ready to do revisions as we think through the next version. So really appreciate everyone's feedback. On the agenda, we do have an outline. If I can move real quick into item number 5 on our agenda, we have an outline for the next several meetings of topics to cover. So at our next meeting on March 17th, letters of intent, what that proposed process would look like. So we would be presenting a way that we will do letters of intent. Again, you are an advisory council. We would want your feedback. So we will get that information to you well in advance of the meeting. And then ideally at the next meeting, we would come back to you with revisions for this council to say, yes, we like it, no, we don't like it, and conduct a formal vote on that. So wanted to put that on your radar to know that that is what is forthcoming, is letters of intent. President Ginsburg.
Yeah, I just want to go back, Emily, in terms of a future agendas to what has been raised by a few people, and that's what's in and what's out of the conversation. I want to concur that extending the conversation about core curricula seems to me to be out of bounds, and we ought to probably stay away. In fact, I would recommend and ask that we stay away from that. That's really the purview of the universities, not the purview of this group, and that we look at this issue of duplication, we look at the issue of emerging fields, we look at the issues that really we were going to talk about. And I know you raised it kind of innocently, but I just wanted to affirm that that is an important issue, but I think it's not an issue for this group.
Noted. I think my comment was to say, I hear that that is an issue,
No, I get
not
it.
that this group would address it, but it is something that is in the air, and that as a commission, we cannot just say, well, great, moving on. So I hear everybody saying that this is not the place for this group, maybe not something to even tackle, but nonetheless, here we are. It was talked about as an element.
Well, it's absolutely a critical issue for universities to prepare all of our students for the future. Things like AI and all the emergent trends and how that's embedded in core curricula. But I think it's just somewhat far afield. The critical issue, I think, for the state right now is for the state to deal really with great rationality this issue of duplication and the issue of emergent fields, so that we prepare the economy for tomorrow. And there are lots of pieces of it, but that's not one piece I think that we ought to be doing.
Thank you. President Jaskin, and I think you might be our last comment.
Yeah, and I just thank you for indicating that the materials for the next agenda would come out early. Do you have a sense of sort of how many days in advance we will have to review? I just want to make sure that I wasn't able to give due diligence to what was sent out on Friday because I had board meetings all weekend. So I want to understand what ahead of time means for the future.
Sure. So I think we can commit to having those materials to you no later than 1 week in advance of the meeting.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. And I certainly understand and respect everybody's busy schedule. So we will work to give you as much advance notice as possible. Great. Thank you, everyone. We will come together again on March 17th. Thank you for this feedback. Bye-bye.